I escaped my narcissistic ex, then took the pettiest revenge of my life. There was a time in my life when I was with a truly dreadful girlfriend, and even now, thinking back on it makes my stomach tight. She was not simply difficult or unpleasant. She was the most cruel, narcissistic, self-absorbed, controlling, dishonest, manipulative, and egotistical person I have ever had the misfortune to know, let alone love. She drained the life out of me piece by piece like an emotional vampire. The worst part is that I did love her. I loved her so much that I kept excusing things I should never have excused, kept ignoring warning signs that were practically screaming at me. By the time I finally understood what she was, the damage had already been done. My family and friends saw it long before I did. They watched me disappear into that relationship while I kept pretending everything was fine. Afterward, I learned that some of my friends would literally avoid me if they saw she was with me, which she almost always was because she barely let me go anywhere alone. Others would call more friends to come over for support the moment they realized she was there. No one liked her, not one person. She was rude, obnoxious, demanding, dismissive, arrogant, and painfully conceited. Every conversation became about her. If it did not begin that way, she would twist it until it did. She had to be the center of every room, every story, every feeling, and I was blind to it, trapped in love and denial. Not long before everything finally collapsed, my friends and family staged an intervention. They told me plainly and painfully that I was living with a narcissistic bully who will destroy you. Hearing that should have broken the spell immediately, but it did not. I did try to leave. I got out for 2 nights. For 2 nights I tasted something like freedom, but when I returned to collect my things, she pulled me back in. She pleaded, shouted, threatened, guilted me, and then promised enormous change. She said everything I had been desperate to hear. I wanted so badly to believe her that I stayed, and of course, the change did not last. That became the pattern. I would reach the end of my strength and try to leave, and then came the staged breakdowns, the empty suicide threats, the screaming fits, the emotional blackmail. Eventually, exhausted and frightened, I would give in. The moment I did, her entire face would change. She would go from fragile and broken to victorious, from victim to bulldozer. It was terrifying to see. I felt like I was living inside a nightmare where reality kept shifting under my feet. She was a psychological abuser. Everything was performance, smoke, mirrors, and calculated emotional control. Later, I found out she had a long history of faking breakdowns to get her way, inventing crises, creating wild stories about conspiracies, and dragging people into chaos. She had done it to family, to friends, and to the men who came after me. It was not an accident, it was her method. It also explained something that had always unsettled me at social events. When we were around people who knew her, some reacted strangely. A few would tense up. Some seemed to physically recoil when she came near them, as if their bodies remembered something their mouths would not say. There were even 2 occasions when complete strangers called her a monster and a home wrecker. She just laughed it off like none of it touched her. After we broke up, I learned so much more. Too much. None of it was good. She had left behind a trail of debt, betrayal, broken trust, and destruction across 2 continents. It took another 6 months and several failed attempts before I finally escaped her. Even then, she would not leave me alone. She bombarded me every day with texts, emails, and chat messages, sometimes hundreds in a single day. One moment she was declaring undying love, the next she was sending vicious abuse and threats against my safety. Once the relationship ended, the harassment became her full-time occupation. It wore me down in ways I cannot properly describe. I was terrified, constantly tense, unable to rest, unable to breathe properly. Eventually, I broke. I ended up in psychiatric care, physically exhausted and mentally shattered. That relationship did not just hurt me, it hollowed me out. There was one final night when I gave in and agreed to meet her at our old home. The excuse was that I still had a book of hers to return, a book she would never read, and that she wanted me to do some DIY repairs she insisted needed doing. At first she was calm, almost gentle, and that somehow made it worse. I knew that calm would not last. I knew I would soon be back to measuring every word, watching every breath, trying not to trigger the rage I knew was waiting underneath. Then came the attempts to seduce me, mixed with tantrums and sudden bursts of anger. Before long she was launching into venomous rants about my friends, people she believed had somehow wronged her. Some of them were single mothers I loved, respected, and deeply admired. She talked about reporting them to child services out of pure spite, not because they had done anything wrong, not because she cared about their children, because she wanted to hurt them. Her ego was so enormous, and yet so fragile that even the smallest disagreement could become a war. But hearing her threaten my friends and their children lit something in me. I was furious, truly furious. This selfish bully, this emotional tyrant, this lifelong narcissist, this walking source of misery and poison was preparing to ruin more lives simply because she could. Because she believed the world owed her obedience. Because hurting people made her feel powerful. And the worst part was knowing there was almost nothing I could do to stop her if she chose to go through with it. So I stayed calm. I excused myself and went to the bathroom. Then, in one final act of private revenge, I put all of her toothbrushes where they absolutely did not belong. I made sure they were thoroughly contaminated, then I did the same with her mascaras, then her makeup brushes, then her mustache bleach, stirring it with one of the toothbrushes for good measure. In short, anything in that bathroom that could be fouled, I fouled. It was disgusting, it was petty, it was not noble. But after everything she had done, after the fear, the manipulation, the threats, the humiliation, the exhaustion, and the damage she had caused, it felt like the only tiny piece of power I had left. And even now, I will not pretend I regret it. It remains one of the most satisfying acts of revenge I have ever carried out.